Sorry. Let's deal with that. So we'll do an introduction, but thanks for sending through all the stuff ahead of time. It's really good, and it takes me back to a former life I used to have. I worked in occupational health and safety, and we talked about risk. And best answer I ever got to when I speak to a group of what is a risk, and somebody just piped up, it's something I'm prepared to take. And I think that really sort of at a very high level contextualizes everything that falls out of some of the areas that we're covering today. So it is what it is, and it is what we're prepared to take. So I think that's quite a nice opening. So I'm going to hand Catherine, hand over to you, and then we'll go through some introductions, please.
So hopefully you all read the one-pager or the two-pager. It's pre-read. This is part of our process to review our risk management policy. So the Risk and Assurance Committee will go through the policy, go through the changes. Really, this is setting us up for that start of that process. And we've brought KPMG in to help us today, just to bring that independent view. And maybe I'll just hand straight over to you guys.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for the opportunity for us to help you facilitate this workshop. I'm Kirill Voronchev. I'm a partner at KPMG based in Wellington. I lead our public sector risk and assurance practice. I work across central government agencies, with crown entities and with local councils, working with their senior leadership team to help them make better, more risk-informed decisions in complex situations. Out of all the work that I do, probably risk appetite is one of the most exciting things that I'm involved with, probably from several different perspectives. Firstly is that I think that risk appetite is really fundamental for strong government, strong management, and it's also a very key tool for developing strong risk culture within organizations. And also for me, I see this as a nexus between sort of management, governance, risk-based decision-making, strategy, delegation, and everything. So that's why I'm quite excited about this. I've seen both good, bad, and the ugly of risk appetite. I've worked with organizations where risk appetite is a nice one-pager sitting somewhere in the appendix in the board papers that people don't really never refer to. I've also seen organizations where risk appetite is defined very sort of broadly and very loosely, so actually people don't know how to use it in their day-to-day decision. But I've also seen the good examples where risk appetite is actually quite embedded in day-to-day decision-making, where it drives delegation, so where it creates a lot of sort of confidence for both governance and management about how the decisions are being made.
Thank you, Carol. My name is Kate Shaw. I'm a partner from KPMG's Sydney office, and I lead KPMG Australia's risk practice for public sector and not-for-profits. Risk appetite's where it's at. We've been doing risk management for a very long time, but risk appetite has come into vogue in the last few years, and that is because it forms that really important link between if this is the strategy and what we need to achieve, there are some risks we're just going to have to take because, well, here we are government, and no private sector organisation would take on the challenges that we face in government. And therefore, it provides that ability for the leadership to say, if this is our strategy, here's some things that we accept we are going to have to risk, but absolutely some things that, even if it stops us achieving our strategy, we don't want to risk. So that conversation turns out to be very, it's sort of a missing piece, because you talk about all the great stuff in the strategy and you never get any further. That's what keeps me engaged, is those conversations at the strategic level. I've been working with risk appetite over about 8 years since it exited just the financial services context, where it's a regulatory expectation in Australia, and has become very common across all sorts of different organisations. There is no one way to do it. Our objective today is to work through what are some of the considerations and the ways to do it to land on agreement for what will work here for the council, and then we would like to translate that into an actual start at getting something you can all agree to. So between Kirill and I, we do work quite a lot on projects in New Zealand where they're tricky, and this risk appetite tends to be where you really need to have hard conversations and settle something, and so we're glad to be involved.
Would you like us to carry on?
That would be great.
Okay. So risk appetite. I'm conscious that probably we could easily spend the whole day talking to you about this. It's quite topical and quite important, but we've only got a couple of hours. So I think it's quite important to establish the expectations for today and then set up some key objectives in terms of what we want to achieve. And I think for us, there's probably three main themes to do today. I think where we want to start is with some sort of an alignment exercise, right? We want to ensure that we all agree on the approach to risk appetite and what will work for you. So as Jeff mentioned, there is no one way, right? It's not like we can take a textbook and just can apply it to you. We really want to make sure that whatever we decide today is something that you feel comfortable with moving forward. So we'll want to make sure that we all use a consistent terminology today. So and also want to ensure that we've made some conscious decisions about some of the design principles that will lie behind the risk appetite approach that we will talk through today. And also start thinking about what it means for us, how we will be using this risk appetite in the future, so it doesn't become just a one set and forget exercise for us. Then we want to move on to start actually teasing and start thinking about the practical side of risk appetite, what it means for your risks, for your strategy today. And we want to make sure that we don't only focus on sort of the risk that we want to avoid, but also start thinking about sort of the opportunities or the areas where we want to actually take more risk to be more effective, efficient, and more innovative. And also Kate and my role today is to make sure that we apply that sort of practical lens to your risk appetite discussion, right? So we don't say that, oh, look, we've got zero appetite for, let's say, health and safety or road incidents without realizing the trade-offs that come with it. So we will be testing you throughout the day to make sure that you understand the trade-offs and potential constraints and limitations of some of your decisions. And lastly, I want to set up some time at the end to really have the opportunity to talk about the next steps. So what, depending on how much we would have achieved today, what are the next steps? How are you going to be using this risk appetite in a practical way? And what else potentially may need to be done in the space? How does that sound? Thank you.
We'll
with your expectations.
We'll let you know at the end of it.
Brilliant. Well, with that in mind, our agenda is fairly straightforward today. So we'll start with a bit of a fundamentals, and I'm conscious that you all would have received the pre-read pack, so we're not going to regurgitate what's in there, but I still want to touch on a few very fundamental concepts about risk appetite. Then we'll move on into what I call design principles. So some of the potential questions that we feel that may be quite important to agree on today that will drive the way in our approach for risk appetite. Once we've done that, we'll move into the actual exciting part around talking about your risk appetite and seeing where you sit. And as I said, we'll leave some time at the end to think about the next steps. If I may suggest having a short comfort break, probably at 11-ish, for a couple of minutes, probably to give, well, on one hand, to give Kate and I a bit of an opportunity to, think whether we need to course correct during the meeting, but also to grab a glass of water. Is that okay?
Yep, sure thing.
And one last point before I move on is, do you mind if we agree on a few sort of key principles for how we run the session today? Sort of like the rules of engagement. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I realize that this is quite a big forum. There's quite a lot of us, but I would still encourage us to be as open as possible in these discussions, right? And provide constructive feedback. I think actually risk appetite is one of those discussions where we actually very welcome very polar opinions. In fact, it's part of the reasons to have these discussions, actually to see and to hear whether there are, differences of opinions in terms of, oh no, we want to push forward this. No, we don't. That's actually a great conversation to have. So let's be open for it and let's talk about that. Ask a lot of questions if you need to. We're here to answer those questions. And the third point here is, I call it alignment, not completeness. What I mean by that is that conscious that there's a lot that we can cover off today, and probably we won't have the time or the chance to cover off everything. But what I want to make sure is that even if we cover three things, let's do them properly. Let's make sure that we, no stones left unturned, so we're actually quite comfortable with where we land. And the last point, substance over form, what I mean by that is let's don't sweat the small stuff. If there's a minor word in things, let's just, if it's irrelevant, let's just move on. Happy with that?
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Brilliant.
Okay, so fundamentals of risk appetite, they do evolve. It is a tool that you can make fit for what it is you're doing. But in terms of the why bother, risk appetite is used that essentially to capture intentionally that we're going to take risk. And it's been a difficult concept for government in particular to absorb because we don't exist to admit that we're taking risk with public funds. So with that clear acknowledgement, this is actually a tool to make sure that you're taking the right risks. So I don't know if anyone's ever lived with a teenager, but when my teenager heads out on a Saturday night, he has some assumptions about what's risky behaviour and what isn't, and they're actually quite different from what my assumptions are of risky behaviour. And until you have the conversation that says it is my appetite that you will do these things, but it is outside my appetite that you'll do these things. So he might assume, don't use mum's Uber account. I live in Sydney. Don't use mum's Uber account if you haven't got approval first. Whereas my risk appetite is absolutely use my Uber account if you are faced with a difficult situation, a drunk friend with a car, or it's just late and dark and you really need to get home. But until we have that conversation, he's coming at it with his own assumptions. Essentially, running an organisation is the same. We've all got different upbringings, different cultures, different families, different previous work experience. And until we say, these risks are actually okay and I get that we have to take them, management may just execute on what they assume from their own upbringing. So that conversation at the top level to say, not just conceptually I'm okay with this, but I specifically mean take the Uber, but don't drop 6 friends home on the way, is a really important part of the calibration to make this realistic. So that knowing intent that says take some risks, if you can translate it into something that crystallizes, then you can actually empower people to take risks and to avoid risks without everything coming up to this forum for you to decide on. So if at middle management, it's very clear to me that I'm not allowed to spend outside my budget, I will escalate every single time I need to. But if it's been made clear to me that in the following situations, you're authorised to procure emergency stuff, put in place what's required, because that is a situation we're not prepared to wear, then I can get on and do it without slowing myself down with admin. So there's a real governance expectation there where if you've made it clear from the top what you will and won't risk and what the guardrails are, then it allows people to move forward with more confidence and empower them to make those decisions. And then thirdly, it's very easy to just keep doing things the way we've been doing them. And until you have that conversation at the top that says this strategy is quite ambitious, there are some things we're going to have to actually do differently here. Let's challenge the way we've done it, then you'll end up with a better outcome. So artificial intelligence is the hot topic with my organisations I'm working with in Australia. Many people are coming to artificial intelligence saying, well, it's a bit complex, we're not very mature, we're not ready to do it. That only goes for so long until you realise that your entire workforce is banging their work information straight into an uncontrolled environment and using AI anyway. So immediately you're like, okay, let's challenge that. That used to work with other types of technology, but not with AI because everybody now knows what it can do for them and they have access to it. So you do that quick challenge that says, will it always continue to work for us? If not, what is our appetite? And then you deliver within the risk appetite rather than our own assumptions. Does anyone have comments, arguments, feedback on that thinking and how it might apply here?
Love the Uber analogy.
So I know that every time, well, let's stick with my son. He turned 18 on the weekend, by the way, so kind of an issue. Well, I mean, it could be a good thing, right? So at least he's legally allowed to do stuff now. Every time that adult leaves the house, he is taking some risks, and I'm taking some risks letting him go out by himself. It used to be an issue when he was 6. I sent him up to the street for the first time, and I said, why don't you go up and collect the bread rolls that I've already ordered from the baker? Now, I already knew there are no driveways between us and the bakery. The baker already knows who he is. I've already paid for them. I ordered them. I know they'll be ready. And I've got eyes on that kid for 3/4 of the way. So I was like, off you go. And he said, that doesn't seem very safe to me. So bless him, his mum's a risk consultant, so well played. But I was looking at the risks and thinking, I actually want a 6-year-old.
Sorry. Sorry, hopefully joins. I can see the chat.
If you're doing without sound, you should be fine.
Joins automatically with sound. That's annoying.
Yeah, that's annoying. Feel free to interrupt us if you need to do some technical stuff. I want a 6-year-old who is independent and confident and can take on challenges. So if something goes wrong in his life, he knows he's got the resilience. So that kind of risk trade-off is one that I make all the time, whether he's 6 or whether he's 18. And I think if you can make sense of my rough little diagram up the top here, the font's a little bit small from where I'm sitting, but trust me, the vertical is return, and then the horizontal is a risk axis. If you are taking no risk at all, you get no return. If you are taking too much risk, your losses exceed the value, and then you also get no return. So what you're trying to do is get that balance of, I'm prepared to send that child out to walk up the street by himself, knowing that I have certain constraints in place, because I think that's an optimized point that balances it. If I sent him from my house to another suburb on the train, that would be outside my appetite, because I think that's too much risk and I'm likely to incur losses. So if you'll forgive me with the very pedestrian example, I always like to bring these things back to things that are just simple and I can relate to. And different organisations will have a different risk appetite, and that same organisation will have a different risk appetite depending on the time and the conditions. So there might be things you would have done 10 years ago that are no longer appropriate here, but there are other things that you now have a different appetite for, and it's based on your stakeholders, the economy, your financial robustness, the expectations of the community, and all of those things will shift on you, and then suddenly you go, we actually have to take a bit more risk here for a while, or a little bit less. So to me, if you can keep that in mind, what it really clearly says to me is getting those trade-offs in balance is so important. And to Kirill's point earlier about setting a zero risk appetite, you can set a zero risk appetite. It's very hard to hit. It's very expensive, generally speaking, but also it means that you are accepting a whole bunch of other risks. So you can say we have no risk appetite for cyber attacks. Lots of people say we love to have zero risk appetite for cyber attacks. My immediate response to that is, we'll give you $35 million and I'll just disconnect all of your employees from the internet, and then I can guarantee that you'll be right. Which turns out to be, generally speaking, not what you meant. So when you nuance it, the answer is actually not that we have a zero risk appetite. We will set our appetite for as low as we can afford, given what we're prepared to do to mitigate against this. And so there is that end, but then the other end of that line there is, if I'm going to achieve a strategy that will create this as an incredible place to live and to visit and be custodians of the land and all of the important things that you have to do here at the council, you're actually going to have to take some risks. So I'm not close to your work, but I assume, for example, you'll need to clear land to build houses, for example, or disrupt sensitive areas to put in place new sewerage lines. You know, all of these sorts of decisions you're making all the time. You're saying, neither of these is great, but I need to do it to achieve my objective, and so I keep them in balance. So I would love to have the conversation around what are the risks you actually accept you have to take, as well as what are the risks you don't want to take. Because I know that as a manager, I need people to accept that there are risks I am taking, and then be very clear that they knew I was going to do it and they're okay with the way that I am. So questions, concerns? I can. There's a thumbs up. That's a good start, but it's easy to say, hard to do. So from the early conversations we've had, we understand there are sort of a few areas where it's worth having a really active conversation. There's lots in risk appetite, but we've drawn out 3 that we wanted to just table to discuss what is fit for purpose here. And also to answer your questions. Like, really, this is your chance to have a really active conversation around, I don't understand what you're talking about, Kate and Carol. Please explain to me how this is meant to work. Or we've tried it and it didn't work here. Let's actually lock in. Now, we did give you the pre-read. I know you didn't have long to review it. There's some data in there for those who want to look at it, but we are equipped for an active conversation. So let's start with the first one. And if there are other questions you want to ask, this is the time, this is the forum to ask all the stupid questions and make sure you're light.
Before we start, so lots of reading, lots of terminology. The one thing I didn't find defined anywhere, but it was referred to a couple of times, was our risk profile.
Mhm.
So, but that's not defined. It just refers to it. So, just it'd be quite helpful to hear what I think I have a view of what that might be, but I'd love to hear from a practitioner point of view. When people talk about our risk profile, what are we talking about?
Great. Okay, good starting point. I get my authority from back when I was a graduate. My boss was on the council that wrote the Australian Standard for Risk Management that was adopted as the International Standard for Risk Management. So I'm old school. Kiryl's more of a modern practitioner, and even we argue. So let me tell you what I think, and I'm sure Gareth will also have his own views. Risk is defined as the impact of uncertainty on your objectives. So it leaves room already to be upside or downside, but let's not get tied up in that. To me, the strategy is at the heart of what you're trying to do as an organisation. The risk appetite is the statement of these are the risks we will and won't take. And the risk profile, independent of that appetite, is right now, here are the things that could threaten our objectives. So there is always the chance that we actually run very short on fuel supply at the moment. That is a risk. There are things I can do to mitigate that risk. That flows straight from the strategy that says need to drive stuff, may not have the resources. That is a risk. So your risk profile is then something every organisation articulates in its own way. You might have enterprise or strategic level, you might have operational level, you may have a large universe of both, but your profile is what are all the things that stand between us and the achievement of that strategy, potentially. Gareth, do you want to take it? Any notes to?
I disagree with that. I'm happy with that. I think that's the way we've reflected it in conversations.
So does that make sense? Is that the context you're asking?
I think so. So that's not the same as our residual risk.
That's your risk exposure.
Yeah. So the risk profile is basically all the things that are facing us.
Yes.
Is that what we're saying? So
And-
it's our context.
And then you assess those risks to come up with ratings.
Yeah.
And then the inherent and residual and target are all wonderful jargony things that justify the existence of consultants to explain it back.
Would your risk profile be the one that kind of gets updated more regularly, given that they
Yeah.
can change?
Yes, exactly right. Your strategy is generally set unless something changes dramatically. Your risk appetite matches the strategy, although, as I said, you may change the way you calibrate it from time to time, but the profile remains the same.
Question.
Sorry, the profile changes all the time. The profile is the one that evolves while the others remain the same.
We have a portfolio of risks, hundreds of risks, little risks, big risks. Some of those and a lot of those risks interact, water versus roads versus what have you. One risk may magnify the risk in another place. So if you could also at some point address the interaction effect of those risks and how that affects our risk appetite, because our discrete appetite for one specific risk may be completely off base when we figure the interaction effect across the portfolio of risks.
Yeah, absolutely. Without going too much into another direction, the recognition of that connectedness between risks that forms clusters is really important because we're not in a linear world. So the simple this rating of this risk and this rating of this risk is permanent doesn't work when you realize that as soon as you have, for example, a pandemic, your cyber risk goes up. because all the criminals are at home in the basement in their boots instead of out breaking into houses. Look, legit. So that I think that does it is a very important recognition that risk management is a very simple tool to conquer a very complex problem. And so there are different ways to do your risk profile. I like something that is simple, practical, and useful, and it's not necessarily a purist approach. But the thing that you're genuinely worried about as a council is the thing that I would put on your top level risk profile, so that you're focusing your efforts not on writing stuff down, but on the mitigating the impacts and likelihood of those things, so they do not take you out. And if it is a cluster of events that we may be exposed from a water point of view, if there's an earthquake and they're all contingent and we'll only be ready for that if we've got enough financial reserves, to me, that's a risk I want to worry about, rather than treating them individually in a way that's BAU and could be done lower in the organisation.
And Gareth, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand your approach, you do consider risk interconnectivity.
Yeah, so our policy defines risk interconnectedness broadly. Our case defined it, no difference, it's a slightly different language used. And we sometimes at the Risk Insurance Committee talk about our risk ecology, not trying to throw out a phrase there to add additional complexity, but our risk ecology is understanding how risks influence each other and how risks, if they happen, events can cascade across our risk environment. So we use that phrase risk ecology at the moment. Obviously, if that's confusing, we can revisit that. And our risk tool that we use for our risk register does capture the interconnections between risks. So we have presented connectedness to our risk committee before. I agree with Kate. I think it's really important that we do understand that. And often when an event occurs, it can occur when people weren't anticipating it because they hadn't understood the interconnectedness between risks.
Okay. A few on the board, but I'm happy to be interrupted and interrogated on any risk topic, because that's what we're here to do. So there is a dilemma there then in terms of appetite, tolerance, and threshold. It's a little bit of jargon for you. Let me pull them apart. Appetite is the expression of the risks you will or will not take. Let's go with a good example. Insolvency. Probably have a low appetite to be insolvent as council. So if you take that one, your tolerance is translating that broadly, for me, translating that into a metric, a measure that says insolvency is a pretty hard and fast line. So that's probably easy. And you go, well, this is what that constitutes in our world. The threshold is the set of traffic lights that show you if you're approaching that. So I'm a board member, as a volunteer in my spare time. I don't want to come to an audit committee member and be told I'm insolvent. So the thresholds are the signals that I use to say, well, our reserves are lower than I have said is acceptable, and our working capital is lower than I have said is acceptable. And that goes to an amber light, which prompts me now to do stuff, rather than just setting that appetite is not to be insolvent, and then I'll be told when that happens. So there's a sort of cascade of information that you can then put behind it. And to me, that the tolerance level, which is essentially the measure of what that appetite means, is an important translation so that we are all on the same page. So it allows you to say, when I said don't do this, I actually meant don't do this more than you're doing it now that we consider to be fine. So compliance breaches is a good example. Yes.
Exactly. We use there's an objective measure. You set a debt limit or whatever it is. There's a threshold which you cross. That's an objective thing. Now, with other things, they're subjective, and by definition, people's view of them will be different. So how do you define those things, like legal risk, for instance, when, in a way that's really clear?
Well, that's why it's really hard to do risk appetite, because if you're in a bank, it's pretty simple because everything's just got a number. And yet that's how, certainly in Australia, the banks stuffed up because they forgot that you actually do need to articulate a tolerance to how you treat customers and things. I think the challenge is measuring them. Your risk consequence table actually has a good attempt at putting in place some words to describe it. So when you say legal risk, bringing that back a level and saying this many compliance breaches of this tier of legislation, or this amount of a fine that we will wear versus won't, or we accept that we will be taken to court from time to time, but then capturing that exposure. So there's a way to sort of crystallise it back. I think the best located in only one section of your risk management ecology, otherwise we're overcomplicating it. And if at the top you say we have a low appetite for compliance breaches, then you use the consequence criteria as a way to guide you and say, that actually means the same level we have now, which turns out to be 25 a year. And then that's the nuance that management needs. Whereas if you just say no appetite, then they know they can't do zero. So then they just don't tell you about the breaches.
I think your point is absolutely correct that sometimes you can come up with a quantifiable measure, sometimes you can't. And that's where risk management is a little bit of an art and then a little bit of science.
Yeah. I mean, we often have to make policy decisions which we know might be subject to a challenge. Now, we make decisions that we believe are justifiable and defendable, but the further you go, the more likely they are to get challenged. So, you know, the likelihood, how do you define something like that? The likelihood of being challenged when you still are always going to make a decision you think is defendable, but that the more extreme you go, the more likely it is to be legally challenged, which is a risk in its own right.
Yeah, well, I think you just have to bear that in mind when you set the first decision, that's something we bear in mind. And also that's almost like you don't necessarily write everything down in your risk appetite statement, or we would be here for weeks drafting the thing, but you send that message to management that says we will sometimes be tested and we will find that the position we've taken isn't appetizing to the community. And you know what, if it's critical to our mission, sorry, that's what we had to decide. And other times you say, okay, we didn't realise it was so important, and you might change.
Yeah, another way to think about that point would be for legal risk would be you get your legal input into the decision you're making, and you might make a decision which has really strong legal basis to do it, but you know that people will just object anyway, so they're going to complain, they'll take some legal action, but you're quite confident that
that's the bit you can't control.
Yeah. Or you might be heading down a path where you get your typical on the one hand, on the other hand, type input, and your tolerance might be, look, we're not going to do something where we think there's a pretty material chance that if we were a challenge, we'd lose. Whereas if you're on strong grounds, you might just have to accept the challenge and the cost. Yeah, but that's sort of, you can't write all that down in a pithy statement, but that's the way in which that would develop. But I was just going to comment that I think that how you've described orally the appetite versus tolerance is really good. I mean, because in your document, the pure definition was a little bit nuanced, in that it says risk is the amount of risk you're ready to bear to achieve objectives, and then tolerance is the amount of type of risk you're willing to accept.
Yes, it wasn't very clear. That's my fault.
Whereas when you come down your document to table C, it's more clear that tolerance is a concept of measurable limits, which in some cases is numerical, and other cases is a bit more judgmental and subjective. But you can go a journey down to still have quite useful guidance, even if there are subjective statements. And you can sometimes get, as you say, tolerances or indicators and stuff that will guide you.
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, thanks. That observation you made about Australian banks kind of resonated with me, because and not that our bank is ANZ, but for our business and home. But the point you made about them not understanding that they have to take into account the customers or the public. So, in looking through the current policy with what you're saying, most of the risks identified, even the workforce risks to some extent, seem to be and articulated largely as external risks. Whereas the sort of issue you were talking about with the banks was them not understanding that the way that they do things creates a risk. So much of the stuff here, particularly when you get down to the financial stuff, so financial risk, it looks at risk to us not having enough funding, not the risk of us making or finding ourselves in a position where we're having to spend way, way more than had been budgeted or anticipated. So that's an internal risk to some extent, although there are often external factors that contribute to that. And similarly to the reputation in the community and political risk, much of the way we're currently looking at this is what's the problem out there, when actually the problem's probably at least as much at home. So I just wonder what your observation about that might be.
I guess I'm just wary, I'm just going to jump out. I'm very wary of losing time going down all sorts of risk rabbit holes. And I think what we need to do is get our framework right first before we have these.
Well, this is the framework. Well, okay, I get you. Sure. However, if we're only looking for almost exclusively at external risks, that is a framework issue. When we should, I think, be taking a holistic approach to risk, a more contemporary approach to risk that actually looks internally too. So I think it kind of sits here.
If I can, would that be at a time when we define what the strategic risks are that we need to set appetite for? But this is about setting a framework for how we set appetite, and then we decide on the risks and use that framework to address that issue. I'm just aware that we've only got 2 hours and we need to stay.
I think that second question is the place to discuss.
Yeah, I think we can probably.
Okay, cool.
You've got external risks and internal risks,
Yeah.
both.
Thank you. Gareth was wanting
Just one really quick comment. Our policy does look at internal and external risks. I suspect what you're seeing is a lot of the strategic risks that we have at tier 1 sit at the external level or side of that. But we do absolutely have risk register that comes off both. We categorise them as internal and external.
Yeah. Thank you.
As
I'm
expected.
sorry, John.
That's fine.
If I can just give my 2 cents at this point. I wonder if there was a principle missing earlier, which is we need to keep this as simple as possible as well.
Yeah.
When we're talking about internal and external risks, I don't even want to ask what the distinction is. What we're concerned about are the risks to our strategy. Tier 1, tier 2, again, let's just keep it at the level of what are the risks that will derail us from achieving our strategic objectives.
Yeah.
For me personally.
And so I think that second question very much is about solving for that, because if you just cascade straight from the strategy, your risks are what is going to stop us achieving our strategy from whatever source. As soon as you start categorising that, I find that very confusing anyway. So I just like them to all be one pool. And then you can cascade that down through your risk appetite and your profile. Now, with risk appetite, there's 2 ways to generate your risk appetite statement. The first is coming from the strategy, and that way it says there are some risks we will take and some we won't. Therefore, here is an articulation of those, and that cascades down into our governance structure. That's really easy from the top, but if you're middle manager Kate and you are trying to decide to, there you go, whether to shut, what's the magic street called? The street that I'm on. My hotel is on, whether you're going to shut that street on a Tuesday afternoon to do maintenance, like I'm making an actual practical decision right there. If the risk appetite is from the strategy, I can't just go straight to the one that says road closures and we have an appetite for that, because there won't be one. What I need to do then is a bit of analysis that says community impacts, financial cost, workforce cost. Those ones come together and tell me maybe do it at 1 in the morning. So there is there's a translation point that has to occur if you're coming from the strategy. The way some organisations solve for that is they write the risk appetite statement bottom up from your risk categories. So you say financial safety, community, etc., write a statement for each of those, and then that way it's easier for the users. The downside of that approach is that because those are categories of stuff that can go wrong, you have a risk appetite statement that is skewed to the left, and it's a whole list of stuff we don't want you to do, which doesn't satisfy my need as a middle manager to accept that there are some risks I have to take anyway. Like that road is going to close. That means it has to occur by the weekend. So I'm just trying to decide on the decision of how to keep you all happy with the way I go about it. So I think it's actually an important decision for this group to make, whether it's immediately or but to be aware of generating from one or the other, because they both have pros and cons.
Probably one
Oh, sorry.
one comment here is that based on my experience, 99% of the organisations that I work with in New Zealand, I use this bottom-up approach.
Sorry, bottom up being,
Being risks, so starting with the risks and assigning risk appetite based on the risks.
to the risk, not to the categories.
Not starting with a strategy and thinking about the
Yeah, so the
What are
categories, yeah, from the categories versus the strategy. And my advice is it doesn't work. So what was your question?
Just as an observation that it was just to reveal that there's so many of those risks that our biggest risks are things that we don't control, you know, don't or can't impact, I suppose, which is interesting, you know, and the one that we've been facing a lot recently, of course, is the consequence of congestion and traffic, and we're facing the consequences of it, but not in control of the problem. So yeah.
And so many risks
I like that.
Yeah. So my suggestion for today is that we have a conversation based on the strategy to say explicitly what are some risks we will and won't take. And later on, you can then look at the data and decide how you want to capture them as a document. But it's an important one to bear in mind that I think you can have the best of both worlds if you ensure that your risk appetite statement is generated from the strategy. You will get that balance of risks that we will and won't take, and then you can write it down any way you like.
Rather than doing what we've got at the moment, which is having the categories.
Which is starting from the categories, which means that everything's a low appetite, and you don't have the opportunity to say, I do have an appetite.
Okay, what seems implied in what you're saying is, if you start with the categories, it conditions your thinking to look at each risk almost on an individual basis and not see the
not see the link.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
if you think solely about health and safety or cyber, and these are our risks, that doesn't put you in the framework of thinking about what is our strategy, what are we trying to achieve. So
It's not a
I think
real
you
world
can both,
example with
I
natural
think you can both,
trade-offs.
but I think you do need to start with the strategic risks, and then you set your appetite for the various types of strategic risks, and I think then applying those appetites to the risk category follows. And there's different uses of all of this, because at the governance level, it's the strategic stuff that matters, but your middle managers need practical tools on a day-by-day basis to make decisions.
Yeah, just on that as well. When you say the strategic stuff that matters, it's making sure we're achieving our strategic objectives.
Yeah.
Some of the risks that could impact that will be operational.
Yeah,
So
sure.
it's not just about this nebulous concept of strategic risks, but it's risks to the strategy, which may be operational.
What could undermine them, which could be all these things.
Yeah.
And so if you take my method and always dumb it down to a point you understand, thinking about my 6-year-old again, if my risk appetite statement says we have no impact for health and safety impacts to that child, which clearly it does, I'm not going to send him to the bakery. But my objective is to grow an independent young man, and therefore the only way to do that is take measured risks that mean he does go to the bakery. Now, I don't want to overwork this story, so let me tell you what happened in the end. Send him up the street. 15 minutes later, he wasn't back. I thought, this has not gone to plan. 20 minutes later, his father said, I might just go for a coffee. I said, good idea. Turns out the bread wasn't out of the bakery. The baker had taken him out the back, sat him down on a stool, given him a pan au chocolat, happy days, then given him the bread rolls. And as he's walking back down the street, he ran into his dad, and he was so confident, instead of going, oh my God, Dad, he went, hey, Dad. And Dad went, just off for a coffee, you want one? And he went, no, I'm good. Lesson learned by everybody. So putting that kid aside, keeping your objective in mind is so important, or you get caught up in avoiding all the downsides and you actually don't ever get the thing that you were trying to get in the first place. Now, I will turn then just to risk appetite statement and the risk consequence table. We touched on it a little bit earlier. you have a tool there that is used by management to rate your risks. So is everyone familiar with the consequence table? We can pop it up on the screen. Yeah, it's probably not one that you have to use a lot because it's applied for you. But this is where it's concrete and it's easy for people to assess against. My suggestion is that the risk appetite statement is an expression of, the risk consequence table is an expression of your appetite. So you set your strategy, then you set your risk appetite statement, and then you look to this table, which is a way of making it concrete, that says, if we are very risk averse on some categories, that lines up differently from areas that we're a little bit more relaxed. So I might be quite financially flexible compared with my appetite for safety, or vice versa. And then that's how those columns will align. So I don't want to, again, I'm not trying to over jargon you, but there is a relationship between them all, and there's kind of a hierarchy that sits behind that.
Sorry, could you just say that one more time? So we set the strategy, we've set our appetite, however we do that.
Mm-hmm.
How does that, can you just say one more time how you think that links to the consequence table? Because what should we do first? If we were writing an appetite statement, are we referring to the consequence table that we currently have? No.
In theory, you're writing the appetite statement from the strategy and saying, these are the risks we're willing to wear.
Then we develop our
Then you develop the stat.
Yeah, great.
So if you said we have zero appetite for cyber, then your technology row on your consequence table will have one minor breach is catastrophic. Whereas if you have your IT person in here, they'll tell you that you have 10,000 breaches a week. So that one that's catastrophic will then be aligned with a $50 million loss, for example, because you have no appetite for that thing, but you're a bit more flexible on financial. But
so, okay, just to make sure I've got this, you're saying that the consequence table is actually quite useful IP for us to use as a reference point as we get into actually trying to put some definition around risk appetite.
It's sort of linked with the concept of tolerances.
Yeah,
because you've actually got some expression.
Yeah, you can decide
different types
thinking is there.
of consequences.
Yeah.
So if you see, you've got that table which exists already. So if you had a risk where you were quite open to it, you might be up the top right is okay. That's the tolerance that you have, and you're okay with that, or the consequence. So it helps you think about tolerances and measures.
So you set the appetite, generically speaking, and then you translate it into that tool.
Yeah.
So the other table that's in there, which is the risk level table, which links likelihood to consequence and gives you a level, how does that then link in? Because we're happy with the consequence, but that doesn't, there's a lot of different layers to this, and I'm just aware that we want to get do the first ones. We don't want to get, we need to do the bits that we have to at the top first and then start to come down. But you would suggest that when we're writing our appetite, we've already got a table of consequences that can be helpful, but it might be an iterative process.
You may need to then
go backwards.
You'll have to calibrate the table at the end to make sure it matches. So if you've said we are absolutely financially on the line and we cannot afford a loss more than 0.5% that's not in budget, you have to change your consequence table, because it might say that a medium loss is 1% of budget. Whereas we've just said, no, that would be catastrophic. We can't have that.
So may I suggest that follow Matt's sort of principle of keeping things quite simple, that we probably park this for now.
Yeah.
So I think we've got quite a lot of ground to cover in terms of actually thinking about strategy and risks to the strategy and appetite. And these things can probably follow. That's probably the second order of important.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, we can come back to the Matt, did you want to say something before we move on? Not
in
now.
place of that.
Thank you. All right, wonderful. Any areas of haziness, reservations, other things around risk appetite that you want to surface now, or should we think about moving straight into that more practical? Let's talk about it.
I think that would be helpful. Now, a practical example to pin this on.
There was one thing from me. I think the conversation so far, and the 3-page document, puts most of the focus and emphasis on risk appetite as a decision-making tool linked to strategy, and I agree with all of that. I think risk appetite is also, though, a really important governance tool in terms of simply monitoring whether or not you're actually operating in line with what you said.
Yes.
And it's, you know, it's the boring bland bit, but it's really fundamental.
Yeah.
And that's where, again, this clarification, tolerance means measure, you know, that idea that you can bring reporting through that says, we know what our appetite is and the data shows us that we're operating within it. Great, happy days. And then the data shows us that we're nudging it towards breaching or we're actually on the wrong side of our appetite threshold. Okay, that's now a conversation around who needs to do what, by when, to manage back within appetite.
Yes.
And we don't get caught up in concepts of, oh, well, we're outside, but are we within tolerance? Or, you know, it's we're outside appetite. We're all clear on that. We need to come back inside appetite. How are we going to do it? By when? By what action? And then governance has a role there in monitoring and supporting management to deliver those actions. Sorry.
No, can't agree more, and I think that's what I wanted to cover in the next section of the hearing. So once we get to discussion about what's the thing is actually how do we make it practical, how we implement this in real life, including in governance reporting. Yeah.
Great.
Do we want to play some of these sections?
Well, yes, I think that's a good idea. So I'm going to suggest where we've landed on these is that we express the appetite in words. The tolerance then is a metric that sits next to it and may not necessarily be the exact replication of the appetite, because management may work with you to change that tolerance over the year, depending on other signals. The framing of the risk appetite statement, I don't know is then yet decided, but I've got some nods to my proposal, which is generate it from the strategy and then write it down however it makes sense once it's done. So that is the plan for today. And we will then, I think, accept that you have to move, because we're not starting from nothing here. We've got some existing artifacts to draw on. We will move between the risk appetite statement and the consequence statement for reference in setting those thresholds, noting that at the very end, you will need to have another look that the consequence table aligns with your risk appetite position. That we will all heard?
Again, I think we work through it in a practical sense and will come to life.
That's the plan. So from here, that is exactly our suggestion, is let's work through that practical setting. So is this your strategy?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I'm conscious that in the local government you have, you know, strategic frameworks, then your 3-year plans, annual plans. So
Yeah.
define what is your strategy for it?
It's our strategic framework, and from that flows all of our different sort of strategy documents that may have plans of activity within them or may not. I would say that in classic local government format, our discipline around taxonomy of documents and strategies and plans and frameworks is not great. So some of our strategies are sort of strategic action plans that will contain actual plans of activity within them. But from this is used to shape our long-term plan, our 10-year plan, which is revisited every 3 years. And then in between those 3 years, it's a 2-year annual plan process. Those are effectively, though, really budgeting activities. The budgets that are set within those long-term plans are really set by all the other strategies that sit outside of that process.
There's the 30-year infrastructure strategy would be where we would, you know, have our transport through waters.
There's a 30-year infrastructure strategy, a finance strategy, a bunch of other finance-related strategies, the climate and biodiversity plan, and our spatial plan, which would all probably sit in those sort of tier 1 strategic documents. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff.
So if we were to ask, what are the top 3 things that must go right in the long term? Would you be able to?
It's such a we have to comply with so many, you know, we have our policies, a lot of them are statutory, we have to comply with them, we have to comply with other acts, so that legal compliance, that can't go wrong. We have to deliver services.
This is in some ways the nub of this issue. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
We can't describe what our strategic objectives are.
Yeah.
How do we know what the risks to those objectives?
Well, I think
There are,
there's a bar up here.
Okay.
Yeah.
they're just so nuanced because we have.
So what? Let's go there. What are the strategic?
So I'd say, so the strategic priorities are getting the basics right first, directly investing in infrastructure services and investing through partnership with others. It's that bottom row here.
And straight away, as I look at that, I can see immediately where we would be able to describe our appetite for getting those things right, and how getting some of them right might even get some others wrong. And that's what we're here to talk about, right? That trade and that need to recognise.
It's quite good that there are 13 key things under each of those three main headings.
Yes.
And they do, so that was done for our last LTP. So we're in the LTP processes, that bottom row will be revisited, because that's sort of the rest of it is supposed to be relatively enduring, strategically speaking, and then that bottom row is the one where there is the opportunity to revisit. I'd suggest, from what I know from our conversations, that a lot of those remain the same for this next LTP, but there is opportunity to change.
Yeah, and you'd add to those the legal stuff, legal risks, operational risks, and the financial stuff, which isn't.
Some of that.
Well, don't forget that these are the things we want to achieve strategically.
Yeah.
They therefore are the strategic objectives. What you're describing
And the business that
are
around.
things that either enable us achieving these strategic objectives or might derail us.
Yeah. So
That's
the
what
basics right.
Yeah.
They don't come onto this list.
That's where
That's
a lot
the
of that,
list.
Compliance activity.
a lot of that compliance activities
Yeah.
within get the basics right. Although some of it will be directly investing in infrastructure or investing through partnership. There's all sorts of risks involved with that. But your core one would be on the left-hand side. Running a really sound organisation.
And some of these might need a bit more description behind them.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good start.
Is that what we've got in our list of strategic risks that comes to the Risk Insurance Committee? You did that last week. I haven't compared the two. Is that where they were taken from? Or?
Without going into too much detail, we started with this at the time when the risk strategy group developed our strategic risks. They're not the same, but they would match. Can I just clarify something as well? These are the strategic objectives. It's not necessarily that there's 13 things here and the same 13 things are the strategic risks.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, we're not going to talk about strategic or operational risk for the purpose of this. We're going to say that if they are our ultimate objectives, what are the things that could go wrong?
Yes.
That could introduce uncertainty or represent uncertainty to us achieving these objectives?
Yeah.
And what then do we want to do about that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is that fair?
Except so much downside in that, Matt, and I want to let's walk into the casino, right? So I'm walking into the casino. I'm not waiting for things to go wrong. I mean, I am, but take your basic casino go. You're walking into the casino in the hope that you will risk stuff and get a reward that outweighs that. And that's actually what I'm doing when I come to work most days. I am taking a whole lot of risks in the aim that will actually create value for everybody. So what my first question is when I look at this with my casino go ahead on is, if that tells you where you need to be, what are the risks that you're going to take? And John, that's strange, I think it was John, with the investing through partnerships. It sounds like there's some risks that we're going to be taking there. There'll be others, I'm sure, at that end of the spectrum that say, look, if we were really conservative, we wouldn't do it. And then as a result, we'd end up in a pickle in 15 years' time. So can you help with that one, John? Maybe break that down. What are some of the risks we're prepared to take?
That's interesting. Casino analogy is very good. Because on the face of it, you think people go to casinos because they want to gamble. So my wife and I, 30 years ago, lived in a casino down in the US, and we had to go to a casino every week, I think it was, to cash our check because the US economy is so paper-based. Because we put it in the bank, it would take 14 days to clear. And when you cash your check, you got drink tokens and chips, gambling chips, and then you got cheap meals and free drinks as long as you tip the waitresses in these competing outlets. Whereas some of our colleagues went there because they wanted to gamble and they thought they're very good at it. By midnight, they'd be sometimes thousands of dollars up. By 3 a.m., they'd be cleaned out and they'd be budging off the rest of us to buy them lunch for the rest of the week. So that risk environment depends what you do in it and what your expectations are of it. So I think we need to think about that. I think we need to get a better grasp on what it is we're trying to achieve through risk management, and that I think it is about having a clearer pathway to perhaps, one thing I find, because my day job is emergency management. So one thing we're doing a lot more now in a crisis situation is saying, well, as we tend to do here, sort of what's the average? What's the acceptable level of risk? And in that case, it's usually the most likely. Well, in a crisis situation, that doesn't help very much because it's the most extreme, but also credible risk. So I think I'd like to see us in looking at all of these matters, considering, kind of reduce the uncertainty to some extent, which we try and do through the assessment process and say, well, it's going to be something like this we're dealing with. Well, actually, most of the time, it's little things happening all the time, I should say. How do they get dealt with operationally? But sometimes they are signals to something bigger occurring. So how does that get communicated? Meanwhile, the really big thing might happen. And so we need to be aware of all of those things, in my view, rather than the potentially overly simplistic approach to say, well, this is what we've agreed on, and so we're going to go with that. We can do that, but we also have to have more of an open mind so that you capture the operational stuff. I think some of that operational and strategic separation is partly a cultural thing in local government in New Zealand, and not much different in other places I've worked, where there's a view that the operational stuff is just a management set of issues to deal with, and only the really big stuff does governance need to deal with. And that is an artificial separation that's not helpful here. So we need to bring them closer together, because easily several operational risks or decisions can result in highly meaningful strategic risks expressing themselves. So we need
You don't want to go too high and lose the.
Yeah, because the granular stuff can sometimes take it out.
But thanks for taking me back to the casino. That's great.
So now I'm taking us back to partnerships. Tell me about these partnerships. What are we actually doing? Just catch me up on the strategy.
Oh, you wanted to pick one to focus on.
Investing in partnership.
Well, that's a good one to think about, because you've got a list of all your partners to live in. And you are taking a risk by doing it. So how do you manage that? So it's a good one to give some examples.
What I'm trying to understand is that an area where you try and be a little bit more innovative, where you sort of say, well, actually, it's not about sort of scrutinizing and having an enormous amount of due diligence on our partners, but actually invest or maybe partnering with some, innovative organizations that can help us, I don't know, unlock other aspects of the local economy.
Which is happening now with the regional deal process, which involves risk because it involves trust. And so we've got a set of outline undertakings to maybe do stuff from central government, but we're working with Central Otago District and at the same time Otago Regional Council. So we're going to be working together in that space, and we've got probably different risk appetites within that too. I think we very much do, actually. So that's one set. Yeah.
I was just going to, as an orientation point for councillors, that actually sort of encapsulates a whole range of things. So it'll be like the economic diversification plan, which is prepared in partnership with 16 organisations, but it will go all the way through to community grants that we offer and seed funding that we make, and small investments where we maybe give a pepper rental to an organisation. It's in recognition that the complexity of challenges we have, we are not always the best people, best resourced to do the work ourselves. How do we actually influence and shape that in the kind of direction we want to go?
But I think for me, the risk component of that is what I've referred to as high risk, low control models. And I put the alliance, I put the PPPs and things like that in that category, where we're on the hook for the financial risk, but we don't control the decision making day to day. And that's where I think, that's, for me, that's a massive one. That's one that we've encountered previously.
I think I'd put something like the Alliance in a slightly different bucket, because that did have a sort of a very structured governance and co-funding arrangement. Yes, it is a partnership with others, but it's also directly investing in infrastructure and services. You're demonstrating visually there's a massive spectrum here, and often these are low control, high trust, but equally low other resources to.
But I think the quantum of the risk is really important though, because you talked about community partnerships. I mean, us getting a $5,000 grant to a community group, it's not the end of the world if it doesn't go perfectly. But, we were, whatever it is, $80 million behind on the Alliance delivery on the estimated cost. So that, the quantum is really important. And the amount, the level of risk and the level of control is critical in that. So I think with the partnerships, if we're stepping back from, sort of investing through partnerships, the fundamental question that underlies that is, why are we doing this? Why?
And I heard that
Why are we doing it? Because if we can really verbalise why, then that should, we do it because these are the only people that can deliver.
Right.
Or
We
we
can't.
do this because we've got influence. Or actually, we're doing this because we haven't got the money, but we may be able to activate somebody else that could deliver some of our core services. So there's a lot of the why behind that. And if you understand why you are choosing to do something or have to do something, that is another layer that comes into what your tolerability is and what
So
your
can I then ask, when will you not? If that's the why, like, we'll do it to replace to supplement our skills where we don't have them. Under what conditions would you not enter into a partnership?
I don't, at the risk of, and we could carry on with this example, I just think we're doing two things at the same time here. We're talking about how do we set up our appetite framework, and at the same time, we're trying to find an example to use that's related to our strategic objectives. I'm just wondering, is investing through partnership part of how we do it? If you were talking before, and is diversify the economy, build a sustainable tourism system, are those, I'm getting a bit lost here as to what are the actual strategic objectives and we're just looking at headings here, and I'm just aware that how do we, I guess, solidify the discussion, how do we get back to the framework we're trying to create, using this as an example rather than diving too deep into something that we haven't really thought about much before. I don't know, I'm feeling a bit lost, but others might not be.
It's a good question. I can see the logic of linking our existing strategic framework into our risk world.
Yes, exactly. But this is
bridge.
just the header, getting the basics right. I mean, that's very, very high level. We've broken that down into human environmental health. To me, those ones in small type are more our strategic objectives. The others are just a heading, and investing through partnership is a way of achieving those, but that's not, housing affordability is about way more than investing through partnership. I guess the thing is we haven't got our strategic objectives settled and understood, and so to work, we could work.
My leap is to say, to fulfill all of those by the look of them at face value, you will need to engage with partners, and that's a decision managers need to make.
Yes.
So if I can give you a statement that says whether it's for development, whether it's for safety or emergency management, we will need to partner with people, and we will not partner with people who meet these characteristics, and we will partner with people who meet these characteristics. That to me is your appetite setting that you get from that might be pervasive. There'll be others in this bucket, but it's not from the heading, it's more from the activity to make it a bit more practical.
Okay. I'm just thinking then, do we do legal? I'm just trying to get the framework in my head in a logical sense, but I get it's a useful example. I'm just trying to put it to the system a little bit.
I understand your frustration, but the concern that, if we look at one potential example in a bigger picture, perhaps, is the transport problem that Quentin was talking about. So we have a role within that, and probably more of a role than has been thought to be the case until recently, and we may be about to change that. But the environment is changing. So we have, so the risk context is changing. We have a rapidly growing, the fastest growing local economy in the country. And so there's a lot more on the road. So we've got congestion happening now. We have to do investment in our roading infrastructure and aspects of public transport in partnership with NZTA and ORC statutorily. That's who we work with, because they've got bigger responsibilities than we do in that respect. And NZTA provides, should provide the funding. And so that's when, irrespective of whether, so it's not us directly investing, although we do a part. The biggest part is others, because they've either got power or they've got money. or influence, and then there's a political element. Whereas investing through partnership in this set is quite a narrow set of things. So even the environment that we're working in has either changed or isn't adequately captured here to be able to understand where those risks and opportunities sit. And then within that same transport context, we have private, seriously, for the first time ever, private entrepreneurs who want to help solve that problem or see an opportunity for themselves within it. Well, there's risk there, and in what you're talking about, what would the parameters be for us to say yes or no, or enter into a ongoing conversation to reach a point we can.
Yes, I'm losing the thread. Look, just come back.
Let's have a little
where
chat
we,
about
what
that.
we want to work on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So let's take
Rather-
5 minutes and we'll regroup.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As much as they hear. We've got 40 minutes, so we will need to carry on with the rest of our program after. So let's
We're on track.
land, we need to land.
Thanks. What would be useful is actually to jump into a scenario and actually start thinking about what our risk appetite may be, or using a sort of an imaginary example, but something that is probably close to home. So the example that you have in front of you is completely made up, but we try to tailor it to your local context. So obviously, this is an example about NAI, and so let's imagine that you are preparing to launch a new AI tool, and let's say it's for asset management. So there is a strong business case for it, which indicates that there is going to be a reduced maintenance cost, better risk-based planning, better time. However, 2 weeks before go live, some of your internal testing identifies 3 unresolved issues. Some workflows are not yet integrated with the legacy systems. There are some medium risk findings from the cyber testing that can be remediated after the launch. And some customer-facing information is usable, but not yet fully accessible or bilingual. The vendor is telling you that if you delay the go live, it will increase the cost of this implementation, and you may lose some of the implementation momentum and lose some of the key personnel from the implementation team. Your internal customer team says that delay will disappoint the internal users and will increase the manual workload because probably you will have to work with 2 different systems. And your technology team says that you can go ahead, the go live is possible, but only with some manual workarounds and heightened monitoring. So you are faced with this decision. What are you going to do? What will you think about? What sort of risks will you consider? What opportunities will you consider, and how will you make this decision?
Would we have set the risk appetite in the background around this? Like if we're setting, there's a decision, so we're starting.
We don't have one yet.
We don't have one yet. Are we going to build one, or are we just making a decision?
If you can tell us how you would navigate all these trade-offs, you're essentially telling us your risk appetite, then we write that down, and you suddenly have a whole set of parameters.
So that's what we want to try and do.
Risk appetite is the first set of principles you start to think about to help you make that decision. What are the pros and cons?
The first thing that comes to mind is you'd have some contingency planning in your project as to understanding what the consequences will be of different scenarios. Is that the sort of thing? Yeah.
That's absolutely that's what you want to do when you get to acting on the solution. What I want to understand is what in here do you go, oh, I can't have that. I'm definitely not having that risk. I'm not accepting that, versus ones you go, well, in the interest of getting it done faster, I'm happy to wear that.
Why is, I see this as complex but simple. Build a decision tree right now. Live, don't go live, build a square box. Chance points are screw up, no screw up. Cost of failure, not cost of failure. Put probabilities on them. And you end up with a decision that is probably the central tendency of the right decision. And, I'm sure everybody here has built decision trees. With probabilities. And that's what falls out of this, right?
So
A few chance points, a few decision points.
I think
in the spirit of this exercise, I mean, I've read through that and I've sort of made a list of what I think the areas of risk in this scenario are. And this is just a little example that we could then apply to everything that goes. So there's a risk that we don't realise the intended benefits of this project. There are the traditional project risks of cost, time, quality overrun. Quality bleeds into benefits, so there's a bit of overlap there. There's cyber risk, and I've put what I call the Te Ao Maori risk as well, because we're supposed to go live bilingual. I assume that's Te Ao Maori and English. So we've got 4 risks, and there's probably more. And what we really need to do, and this teases out our risk appetite, is say, well, which of them wins and determines our course of action? Do you get it? So,
yeah,
I'm not telling you anything that's not already up there. I'm re-asking the question, really, but I'm asking it based on, does delivering the benefits of this project outweigh the cyber risk? Or if we could, for example, say our cyber risk strategy, I think it uses some quite useful language here, medium risk findings. Now, that might have a bit more context around it, and we might have a cyber risk appetite once we get there. It says we will not accept go live of a project that introduces medium risk findings based on an external report by a cybersecurity consultancy. If that's our position, then it's dead easy, isn't it? We don't go live.
And then another one might be when you think about the benefits of it, what the customers, ultimately the residents of the community receive. If the key thing is that we want to deliver something from day one which is accessible in bilingual, and we've said that, say, presumably there's some public expectation, and we don't deliver it like that on day one, then you're not getting the full benefits that you said you would in the first place. You're getting some disbenefits because there'll be disappointment and negative reaction. So you're weighing up the counterfactual, and your judgment call will tell you a lot about risk. So coming back to your decision trees and probabilities, maybe at the end of it all is a probability of 37.6 of whatever, and the judgment call would be, oh, that's too high, we're not going to do it. And people will have a different judgment.
Exactly.
But the thing is,
based on that.
yeah, your probability's inevitably going to be wrong.
Of course.
You're doing that.
This idea.
But the more important thing is structure the problem and then assign probabilities. Think about those. Go back to your team. I've got 3 probabilities I can't control. I've got 1 that I can control. And I'm not trying to say this is simple, but it's just a structured way of looking at it.
So, I agree completely. It's about structure. So if we stick with these 4 categories of risk or risks, let's say that we had risk appetite statements already. We'd written them in peacetime, not when we were actually facing a scenario. So we have a level that we're comfortable with when it comes to cybersecurity, to realising the benefits from projects, to managing costs and time overruns, and to Te Ao Maori risk. Crude label, but you know what I mean. So we've got all of these things, and then we're presented with this scenario. We then have to say, well, if we go live, it takes this risk outside of our appetite. But if we don't go live, it takes this one.
Yeah. So
at which point we have to make a brave decision. Where's the trade-off? Now, the important thing is not, okay, we'll just throw caution to the wind and the cyber risk doesn't matter because the benefits are more important. It's if we land on that decision, how long are we prepared to take that enhanced cyber risk? What else can we do in the short term to mitigate it? When is it going to be fixed? Who, and then you monitor that to bring that risk back.
This is, given the financial delegations, would be a decision that would likely sit with the staff, right? And you're talking about, and that's why it's the appetite. But as we're talking about it, we're talking almost about categories that we haven't. So this is where it comes back to: are we setting categories of appetite? Because that's sort of what you described there, where the staff are making the trade-offs against our category appetites, or
Okay, so, no, great question. So how I'd answer that, I mean,
Yeah.
I've just said there's 4 broad
Yeah.
reasons here, right?
Yeah.
We could debate that, but let's just say there's these 4 reasons. And I said we set our appetite in piece. What I mean by that is we're talking about a specific scenario, but let's
Yeah.
not. Let's actually say, what is our appetite, or what is the council's appetite for realising benefits from projects? Are you happy to not realise all of, you know, you can go into that. Once that appetite is set, yeah, management go ahead with implementing this AI tool. When they recognise, because they will, that the current go live path means that we will go outside of appetite, that's the trigger for management to bring that to the committee, because it is for the committee to make those judgments, that take those decisions around if we're going to breach appetite, which one and for how. The point with the appetite settings already being there, though, if everything actually goes well, or if the cyber report says there's a handful of low risk findings and our appetite is we're okay to go live with low, then management has clarity and guidelines to go. And there's no comebacks.
No.
It's efficient.
We, in this context, Catherine, does QLDC as an organisation apply design thinking to this kind of stuff? Because design thinking implies a high appetite for risk, because, and particularly for this kind of stuff, because AI is new, and until you actually try some of it, you don't know whether it's going to work or not. And one of the philosophies of design thinking is that you fail fast. So this might not be a black and white decision. It might be that the option 3, essentially, a narrow release, and that would require probably some governance oversight of that, to say, well, these parts and what's described there are less critical, and possibly those that do have the connection to the legacy stuff. So let's try that. Let's see how it goes. And then there's less risk. And then, so if it fails, fine, you haven't lost much.
again, for talking about framework, coming back to framework.
Well, that's exactly what we're
So
doing.
if this is a staff decision. I think this would be a staff decision. So what?
Not necessarily.
Well,
It
it depends on the finances, right? But let's just say it's within delegation, the chief executive's delegation, and there's a delegator. How would we what sort of appetite settings framework would assist the managers to make the decision? What would we be setting? What would be the strategic objective, and then therefore the strategic risk, and the appetite would be setting around that risk to help this decision be made? You know, and that's what I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to get back to, are we setting in categories? Are we setting at the level of strategic risk, and what is going to help staff best?
So let's take the decisions instead of probabilities, make them all yes or no.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. Are you prepared to use AI in council operations?
Yes.
Right. So there we go. Got to start. Okay.
I was
Yes.
just going to touch on there, because the one bit we didn't understand here is what's the baseline risk, because the decision to use AI is already a risky decision.
Yeah.
So
Let's just always that. Will we use
That's
AI?
risk already. So is medium actually elevating it that significantly or not? I'm not even sure it is. So, anyway,
So let's keep following this. So yes, to use AI. Unconditionally.
No, not unconditionally.
What are the conditions?
Yeah, exactly.
that it's boxed in.
Yeah, that's right. Because what we're
That's-
trying to do
that's
at the
right.
moment, I'm middle manager Kate. The only information I have is none, except great news. You've just told me I can pursue an AI. Now, start to narrow those conditions for me, so I know what I can decide.
Does our environment matter? Does water use matter? Does energy use matter? Does the risk to the rest of our energy system matter? Our contribution. Yeah, but also we're procurers, and through procurement, what level of AI do we want our contractors to use? Because then what impact are they going to have on our energy systems and our water system based on, do we want data?
So,
Yes.
I think we can box that into a philosophical question.
Yeah.
Which goes back to the first question is, would we use AI in the first place? Because then
You're accepting all of those things.
you're accepting all those things that you
Well,
make that
to
question.
an extent.
To an
So there's always an extent.
There's the extent.
You don't necessarily want open AI for council information. You might want to have a closed AI. So you do start to narrow it. And I'm sorry to tell you this news, but I actually work on AI risk appetite statements because that's a thing. So we're definitely not answering all of those questions when we do this one.
Yeah.
But yes, middle manager Kate, you can use AI for asset management. Now, we've already agreed that, and we'll come up with some parameters around AI, but in principle, we're okay.
Yeah.
So what about, I'm going to go to the bilingual, so because I raised this because I have a client in Australia, we spent a lot of time on this. They're an energy company, and they have said it's an absolute black and white threshold issue. If we do not have agreement from the First Nations owner of the land on which we plan to build, we won't do the deal. So it doesn't matter how profitable, how popular, how convenient, how fast, how trustworthy the partners. That's the next one in their decision tree. The First Nations people on with it. So there's lots of things in there. I want you to treat as black and white, and let's just do boundaries, and then you can nuance into what do we do about the water usage of the AI company on another day. So, what are some of the risks here?
Well, the main one.
Yes and no, this is a bilingual one.
Is it bilingual or not?
Bilingual or not from day one.
Yeah.
When that was your plan,
Yeah.
is
Will we do
delivery
it?
of it, yes or no, bilingual.
And maybe the nuance here is that this tool is probably more for internal use.
Okay.
So it doesn't make sense, Jay.
Yeah, it's an internal tool, bilingual on go live or not,
So are we prepared to go live?
without meeting all of our
Single language.
obligations.
Without,
Yes.
without our original spec.
Well, that depends, and it is a governance and potentially strategic risk. I'm not going to sweep the difference, but that the reputational risk of either delivering something that doesn't work or something that doesn't meet the expectations that were set out in the business and agreed in the business case. So, particularly if it's just for internal use to improve processes, it sounds to me like the bilingual component and not fully accessible from the outside is not a showstopper. It's not even a risk. It's just a consequence.
But if it's external, then it's a different.
Yeah, different deal. And depending on what the expectations are in that context.
Okay, then let's move on to those delivery risks. So of cost, timing, quality.
Will you do it for more than budget?
Yes.
Within contingency, for example.
Yeah.
But that would depend on how the budget's been drawn up.
Yeah, because budget's already got contingency
Yeah.
in it.
And have we changed the scope? Have we done a variation? All those things that kill budgets, right?
Well,
Because that sort of thing happens.
Well, it sounds like we're down scoping the project at this point. So therefore, it could be a cost saving, unlikely, but could be. So, again, weighing those two things. So it's going to deliver less. It's going to cost us the same, maybe a bit less. But if we want to go the whole lot, it's going to cost a whole lot more.
Will we go ahead with overruns if it means the increase in rate? Increase in rates.
No, because the whole point is to reduce costs. Well,
Is it?
Depends
manage
on-
delivery costs. I mean, offers opportunity to improve quality of services and manage delivery costs.
But in a high growth environment, that doesn't necessarily mean that the total quantity goes down.
No.
Mm. Delivery.
Better value.
I just don't like AI that much.
Oh, really?
Can you ask your question?
Yeah, no.
At what stage, so is there a threshold, a major threshold at which we will accept some of the runs, but at certain points we will not accept? For example, if it has material impact on our future rates.
Yeah, no, I would thought that would be me.
So that's a clear direction, right? This is your appetite.
But-
So actually,
but people
we are
have
not
jobs,
accepting
need
anything
runs.
that will lead to undesired impact on the future rates.
So that affects the initial decision. I mean, we can put this in the white
You
paper,
don't
I'm not
need to
gonna do it, but the initial decision is a go, no go decision. It's a digital decision. Yes, no. If we go, if we go, that's only because we have satisfied ourselves that it's not gonna have a rates impact. So first decision, actually, or first thing is to figure out, does it have a rates impact? If that's the rates impact, if there's no rates impact, then we do a go, no go decision. And these are, the whole thing looks like that. I'm not trying to oversimplify it or anything like that, but you can structure this.
Well, you kind of can, but that's what central government is dealing with at the moment. Well, there's the expectation that AI use will reduce costs, but it tends not to. So
you would have had a plan and a business case at the beginning that this tool will cost X and deliver benefit Y.
Cost benefit, yeah.
And you would have had a contingency in there, and that would have all been approved. And so this scenario here, we're talking about the cost going outside the approved budget, and or the other risk is it doesn't, but it's sort of down scoped. And so either way, it's different from what's approved. And so if you are moving outside what's approved, I would have thought you've got to go up to the next level in the delegations to make that decision to have a lesser benefit. It might not mean rates will go up, but it might mean that the actual benefit on rates isn't quite as good as you hoped it would be, but there's still a benefit as opposed to benefits rates go up. So that cost and benefit of the project to me is sort of a little bit more conventional in the sense that you'd have to go up the ranks to get a fresh decision as to whether the revised X times Y benefit and cost is worth spending the extra. And then you have trade-offs with sunk costs and all the rest of it.
Exactly.
That's what
you
go
don't
up.
achieve efficiency and your PCR drops below 1 or whatever,
There is just within our systems, our enterprise system, if we had a variation to a project, it has to go back up through approvals at the relevant delegations, and comes back down again, and it's tracked and the workflows follow and all that kind of stuff. So there is a very well-defined process. If you took that away from being an AI project and just any project, once it changes, it's subject to the same rules.
Okay, maybe the last sort of point here is around the cyber challenges that your team has identified. How are we resolving this? What our appetite?
How do we frame it as an appetite? I'm struggling because this is a specific decision, so the intent wouldn't be to write an appetite around it. You'd be using an appetite, but the exercise that we're trying to do is to go through the exercise of writing an appetite statement for a hypothetical risk. I would have thought, so that we've got our framework sorted.
Well, this is where, sorry, I was going to say, there's a couple of things that arise here. Is that there's the one that's financial, and as we said before, there's some objective measures you can say, okay, if it exceeds a 5% variance or a 10% variance or whatever it's within someone's delegation, if it goes beyond that. So there's objective things you can do around the financial components. There was some philosophical ones, which in some ways come down to policy and relationships. You talked about iwi, or in your case, Aboriginal people in Australia. So, and we collectively need some sort of policy or understanding is how important is that relationship to us, and in terms of saying, is that a deal breaker? And we need to be clear on that, because we have a situation with Project Shotover where exactly that occurs. We have a breakdown between what they want versus what we want, but we actually started with an assumption that we needed to satisfy them, but then we pulled away because it wasn't financially viable. But that wasn't, never treated that as an absolute or a deal breaker.
We didn't consider the risks.
Oh,
Our report never had the risks.
It's a great example though, is that trade-off.
And it's a trade-off. So
Neither of them is a black and white, but when faced with the situation, and maybe this, like I'm hearing appetites around AI, we will do it if it's a net saving to us or if it's an efficiency. There's conditions you're putting around it. You may go live internally, not bilingual, but you wouldn't externally. So you have a plan.
Well, what I'm thinking is, so I think from this scenario, staff would come to us with, because there's been a problem, they come to us with a report. But like Nikki said, and like with, like I keep coming back to Project Shotover because I just think it's there's so many good risk trade-offs there, and I'm like, well, we probably do need to have like something like this risk trade-off, and so staff are showing us, well, it is over in this way, it is over in this. So what are you as governors willing to trade, not trade? And often we don't do that. We do it in our heads, but we're not like looking at it, and we don't have like back to the strategy. We don't really have that overall strategy. Because when I think about Project Shotover, like, what did I write down? It's our main goal is to deliver infrastructure, right, from the government. That's what they're saying, and core services. So that is getting the food pipe done, but then it's to have a thriving community in our minds. And so there's these big trade-offs, and then there's the statutory TTDT, abide by these rules. So that one has so many conflicting trade-offs, and we all have different personal views, and that's what it ultimately came down to, instead of a really structured risk analysis going, well, actually treaty obligations outweigh it, and we've all agreed that in peacetime.
And our appetite.
That's the issue.
That's the principle.
Yeah, that's what I keep coming back to. It's very hard in certain situations to do it.
We have it. This is why we're doing it now, because this isn't for some reason, whatever it is, isn't quite working.
And we haven't looked at it.
Well, it's a case of, and is it working for staff to elevate the stuff to us into these reports in a way that gets us to
What we don't
think
have
about these
is a really clear, crisp set of risks that we have appetite for and measures.
Yeah.
Because if we were to say, well, how do you even know that you're outside of appetite? There's lots of breadcrumbs here that help us start to think about what it looks like. I think it's actually helpful to think, rather than just of what the 4 or 5 risks are, drop down a level. What could we measure? Let's just think about cyber, just cyber.
Yep.
We've not got much information. It says there are medium risk clients. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the world of cyber risk is able to be simplified into 3 categories of risks: low, medium, and high risk. Right? We could, in peacetime, have a cyber risk appetite that says we don't want to see high risks, high exploit opportunities, but we're not prepared to spend money to eliminate even the low ones, because that will cost millions. We need a budget like this. So our risk appetite for cyber might be that we are prepared to accept medium exploit opportunities in the short term if they have a strategy to close them. That might be our
more diminishing returns and all that stuff too. Yeah.
And that's our statement, and then we can put some
it's our
measures.
statement and measure, or you get to the measure, and then management go, well, actually, if we go live with this risk, they'll let us know perhaps, but they're not asking for our permission because we've already given it.
I mean, you take cyber risk, well, as an example, I always say, no one dies if we get this wrong. Now, not saying there aren't consequences, but no one dies, and the same with, we could apply that same principle to other things, of course, that is going, well, what are those things that, what are the consequences?
You can think about that in terms of the consequences, because the consequences of a cyber attack to a health centre and a whole lot of personal information being sold on the dark web is different, maybe, from the world knowing a little bit more about the asset management plan for this building.
But if we've got stuff on our records which would never ever be expected to see the light of day, because there's been some very frank detailed conversation about an individual or an organisation, and that is suddenly daylighted, then okay, nobody's died, but it might just feel like it. So I guess it's a consequence of, and if we, we have to secure people's personal information, and if that is all, you know, all their rating addresses and their contact details is suddenly public, there's huge.
You would have done a bit of thinking about this in advance in terms of potential consequences in order to work out what your appetite is, and you know what could go wrong, what could be leaked, what information could go out, what could the operations of the council be brought to a halt. You know, you can't, you've got no access to internet, whatever. You think about all of these things.
Spreadsheets are all empty.
Yeah.
It could happen, right?
Yeah. I don't know. So think about all of that, and you would have some sort of general statement, and then you might have some tolerances, some measures, and then you might have some indicators. And then if, depending on the scale and scope of the cyber risk there, you'd have a lot more information. Management would have known a lot. And if it was sort of within your preset threshold, management would crack on and say, look, we're going to do this in this particular way. Or they might even say, even if on the face of it it's within appetite, this is the first real test of it. We wrote this in peacetime, but actually we think we might have a real problem. They might test it. That's a judgment call, you know, above, you know, the relevant tiers of management and potentially with governance maybe.
We have 10 minutes.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, shut up.
Actually, I'm assuming that it probably feels like we haven't achieved much, but if I think about some of the 3 objectives that we laid out at the beginning, we've actually made some progress. Right? We've agreed on some of the design principles in terms of how you want to move the risk appetite forward. We've tried to probe into our thinking around risk appetite, and probably you will agree with me that we understand that it takes a while. That's why I said at the beginning that we can probably easily spend the whole time talking about this. But at least now we started thinking about, we understand why it is important for us to define certain things, right?
Yeah.
How potentially complex that may be. And also probably it's a lesson for us to understand that actually, come back to Matt's point at the beginning, we need to keep it simple, right? Otherwise, you know, we'll be bogged down in details. That's really hard to be how to find the right balance. So let's think about the next steps and what would be the logical sort of next step from here. Do you guys?
I have an idea, but and then shoot back. But I think we need a template of this would be how you would write up a strategic risk. It's just in my mind, and I'm thinking about your little pages that you showed us. I think there's an exercise in understanding what are our strategic objectives, and then what strategic risks flow from that. Maybe there's a sense check against what the strategic risks were in the last risk and assurance policy, risk and assurance strategic update. There are a bunch of strategic risks there. None of them are cyber, so that one would currently sit below and would be judged by the category risk appetite statement. So I think we need to sense check those strategic risks. Then we're going to need to write them. We're going to need to set those measures and so on and so forth. Then we're going to need to go back and look at the categories after we've done our strategic risks to sense check whether the category level stuff is set at the right level. That would then inform where staff use risk to make judgments. That's okay. So I'll carry on.
Can I just throw it in? That was a lot.
Was that okay?
I was going to zoom out a little bit, and you know, most organisations manage health and safety really well, and you know, sort of reporting in near miss or identifying a hazard is, you know, culturally acceptable and it's rewarded, right? Because that's really free wallet. So, and this organisation has done a lot of work, invested a lot in risk space. So how do we get that same appetite to, right, this could be something that somebody should know about internally, you know, within the organisation? I think any framework that we have should encourage that, and to be able to say the why. So, and that's not whistleblowing, that's just that reporting of risk. I would rather that we have a system that actually elevates things to this table, because the organisation has identified that they really should come to this table, rather than it being controlled by a delegation. Because, you know, I think if we're looking at delegations, how we control our appetite for risk, I would actually rather have something that's living a meaning that actually comes. And, you know, I think the leadership team, but this one's for you guys. You've got to make this decision. So that's in terms of outcomes, you know, things coming up to the table, whether it's a committee structure or here. Yeah, so it's a living framework. I think the quarterly reporting after the fact at a level is very mechanistic. So it's how we get that balance.
And I think what you're describing is the purpose of risk appetite.
Yeah.
We apply what you
Yeah.
just said to
Yes.
this example, John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't need to
You know, we're saying that if medium risk cyber findings were within appetite, and we're happy to go single language for an internal implementation, and whatever the other thing was, management can make the decision to proceed. However, if our appetite of any of those things is not
And
that,
that's,
then it comes up.
and that needs to sit in the delegations register. You have financial delegations, but as long as you're operating with an appetite, because if you're not operating with appetite, the delegations register would then trigger it to come back to the
And I think
table.
we've got to keep in mind as well, this is a 3-year political cycle. So that appetite can change every 3 years, and some of our projects are longer than that. So actually, I think what Matt's described there around, because I will conceptualise our risk management system as working well in the management space, where we've got the disconnectors in the governance and understanding what needs to bubble up. The appetite, if it's done well and it really truly reflects your appetite, because the appetite we currently have is wildly conservative. And I think that's something we need to think about.
Aspirational is the word.
It's about locking things down because things might be too high a risk to take a chance on, when we're actually operating in a context where we're being asked to take chances and do things differently. So how do we get that lined up so that we're not constantly bringing things to the table where you're like, no, you know, we want to do that, keep going. So I think if we can get the appetite set really well, that will give the organisation so much guidance and should streamline the kind of decisions.
So somewhere that's kind of reckless.
Yeah.
So when
I'll use a specific example. I was having a conversation with staff the other day about the Frankton Library, for instance. So we've got a problem there where we need to renew a lease, but we sort of got this, you know, tied up in a bit of strategic stuff and a bit of non-committalness. And I think, for me, it's a decision that is really easy to make and shouldn't be tied up in, you know, and isn't associated with a whole lot of risk because of the context it all sits. So we should be able to get to a point where this frees us up to make
The
decisions that matter quickly and not get, you know, because there's a risk of not making a decision in that case. So, you know, that's a real.
The other thing that strikes me in this, I'm looking at the risk appetite by category, and even this example used here. A key part of managing risk in this local government context is how it's communicated, how the whole thing's communicated, and if in Project Shot It came up and Project Pure sits in the same space, that inherently dealing with sewage is a risky matter, particularly on the scale that we're dealing with it here. Now, and in the risk assessment, it suggests that, or our appetite assessment says, an absolutely adverse approach to any environmental impacts on water. So, but that doesn't appear to have been adequately reflected in the decisions made when those aspects of those projects within the programs were made, which in, sorry?
There's a reason that the consequence table deals with water supply, not water environmental.
Well, so there's some, I think there's some systemic problems on how we're considering risk and how decision makers at whichever level they are, whether they're governance, management, or partners, or consultants, or stakeholders, that partners, depending on how you want to approach it. Yeah, so that at the moment, that is, it's not delivering the goods in a strategic project planning and investment sense, because problems keep well, it appears as if there's a connection between the fact that major problems. So it's not just how we manage it when things arise, which I think is also predominantly about trust and communication. It's how we, when things look like they might be going wrong or have, it's about how we communicate that. At least we need to be honest with ourselves and with our communities, because in some cases we haven't in the past, and that is a huge risk in itself. So yeah, I think there's a whole lot here that we could reframe, to use the term, that would help all of us going into the future, including when there's political change.
There's another little piece in there, and that's philosophy.
Yeah.
And that's, if you're sitting right here, and you're right within your tolerances. And by the way, I think we put aside the fact that appetite and tolerance are not the same thing. I'm going to treat appetite separate to tolerance. Anyway, if you're sitting within your tolerance and it starts to move, starts to accelerate, no bells go off, but it's moving fast.
Yeah.
And I can think of lots of situations. You work for a place where nobody knew about Enron. We work for a place where nobody knew about mortgages. Those entities don't exist anymore because the velocity went really fast.
Yeah.
And so at some level, there needs to be a culture of, it's not a problem right now. We're not even close to, 2 sigmas away from the center, but you need to know about this.
There's some indicators.
And that's a soft thing. And I don't think that you can just, you can't turn that into law or into rules.
No.
It's got to be a cultural thing.
It is cultural key, but it is about having the right measures and having the right frequency of those measures. So, for example, project's going to be governed with a steering committee. There's going to be a report and status. So there's those indicators on cost, time, project delivery risks, introduced cyber risk are coming through the project meeting. It's beholden on the project manager or someone to look at that and go, okay, this trajectory is looking like it might take us outside appetite.
And
that's the point. That's
the risk manager happens to be nervous.
Yeah.
But also, just throwing out there, the rule framework that we put in place and the measures and not just in risk, but everything, that is a part of creating culture as well. If you have none, it's what chicken egg a little bit, I think. So I think if we create some better structure, it will help create a better risk culture.
I mean, that velocity, you could point to the Charter wastewater treatment plant because everything was within tolerance. We had some storms and all of a sudden we had a breach. We blasted right through the tolerance.
But if you look at Chernobyl, where they were doing a non-standard operation, and they knew exactly what was going wrong, and they knew that all the alarms were going off because, that's good. We're justifying these alarms going off because what we're doing is non-standard. And then it was suddenly, shit, that's why the alarms went off, right?
Yeah.
That's what happened in Chernobyl. Right? They were doing a procedure that wasn't standard, and they justified, they switched off all these safety devices, and then the alarms there. They were expecting them to go off.
Yeah.
So there's.
See, we don't know too much about those tolerances we got shot over. If we were within tolerance and then suddenly we were. The look back on that is, were we monitoring the right things with the right frequency? And the short answer to that has to be no. And that's okay. We need to learn and then go, right, so we can now add some
without getting into all the details, we probably were, but we weren't necessarily highlighting them as the risks that they were.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't necessarily understand. Yeah. So that's about, we call them tolerances, we call them measures. Yeah. They've got to be really practical. As soon as you see that move, you've got to intervene.
And those things are going to become even more important as growth continues at some velocity. And if the regional deal is actually delivered on and other things happen in the future, there's going to be even more demand on us to be doing things with partners. So there's going to be more risk involved. So we need to have a good handle on this stuff. It's not just doing better looking backwards, but going forward, which is more complex, more demanding, higher expectations, possibly changing organisations.
Yeah, water's that sensitive.
Well, last thing's left because everyone else has left the call now, right? So when health and safety first came in, it was that person that came along that told you couldn't do what you were always used to doing and what you knew you needed to do. So it was the person that came and stopped you doing your job effectively, and that's a lot of time. So it's how we make sure that we are more in talk with the organisation, that it's helping and adding value rather than hindering, because that's in terms of a mindset. People need to see the value in all of this, and it shouldn't be just and you have to do this as well. So that's the challenge of organisation.
I come back to Kate and Carilla made the point already. The current to the bottom up approach means that all of our risk appetites are very conservative. If we get the right level, what we're actually doing is we're giving management real clarity that if you're operating in this green space here, fill your boots.
Yeah.
But you're going to be confident you are. You'll be monitoring and measuring the right things. That gives the committee and councillors confidence. And it's only by exception that we get involved. That's efficient.
Can I, as in the next steps, and you might have been going there anyway, but what are you taking away from this and what do you need from us, Gareth and Catherine?
That's it.
Well, I don't, you don't know, you don't need to answer it now, but what's the mechanism for coming back and discussing it? I mean, risk and assurance only meets quarterly, that's October, you know, how are we going to progress this in the interim, because there are some changes that will need to be made over time, over a period.
I suppose I heard you things that you would like to see. So what I heard is a template in terms of how we might define these things. Next steps in terms of fleshing that out, I don't know. You need to tell me what your expectations are.
Okay, so maybe we'll work together as a committee and keep the conversation going. Yeah. In terms of templates, sorry, just to be really clear, what I meant was
these guys what the guidance is.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page, but
Yes, we will definitely help.
Yeah.
great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time and your engagement. At the end of the day, risk management is about stopping things going wrong. So don't get caught up in it. It's just to make sure you're focused on stopping bad things from going wrong.
Will we get a little summary of the key things
Yes,
that
you
we
will.
landed on? That would be helpful.
Well, we'll provide it to Gareth and Catherine to share with you.
Yeah, great stuff. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Sure.
Someone's listening.
You're not going to drive that one up without it. They come twice a year.